So this is probably one of, if not the most frequently asked question on my channel, and that is, what happened to Avery? How did Avery get her brain injury? And I've always been not reluctant to share, but just not ready to revisit the event. I am going to be donating the AdSense that I make from this video to the Grand Appeal. The Grand Appeal is a charity that works alongside Royal Bristol Hospital for Children. Bristol Children's Hospital covers the entire southwest of England and Wales, so there's often a lot of children that are sent there from other places, and of course their parents follow without thinking about where they're going to stay when they're there, and that is where the Grand Appeal steps in. They lend a helping hand and give you one less thing to worry about in what is possibly the hardest and scariest time of a parent's life. They offer parent accommodation, and they also provide equipment within the hospital, such as the pull-out beds next to the patient bed so that parents can stay with their children. They provide gifts for children that are admitted over Christmas time. They are an incredible charity, and we have been at their mercy at one point when Avery was in hospital, and they gave us one less thing to worry about in what was definitely the scariest period of our lives. So please, if you have any extra time, or if you can, then let the ads run through this video and let's try and raise some money for a really good cause. I will leave a link below to the Grand Appeal if you wanted to make an extra donation. I definitely think it is worth it. They are just so important and valued for a lot of families. I know you would have seen my little disclaimer / trigger warning at the start of this video, but I am just going to reiterate, I am going to be talking in detail about Avery's event. It was traumatic, it was sad, and it might not be something that you want to hear. So if that's the case, then just click off now. I'm also going to ask you to be open-minded. This is really difficult for me to share, and especially to share so publicly. I ask that you be respectful and courteous in the comment section. I know that everyone that follows us are the kindest people in the world, and I know that you're always kind and sweet and respectful, but to any new viewers to this video or this channel, please just be respectful in the comments, because I punish myself enough without the help from anyone else. Long story short, we don't know exactly what happened to Avery. We were never given a definitive answer, but I'm going to share with you how it happened. If you haven't already seen my birth story, then I would definitely watch that first, because I'm kind of going to be following on from where I left that, so I'll leave that link down below as well. So the Monday after Avery was born, she was 2 days old, and it was the evening, a normal evening, and we had settled down for bed. We'd gone upstairs to bed at around midnight. I had nursed Avery and put her in her crib, and me and my husband both went to sleep. I'd put some white noise on my phone because I'd noticed that she liked the sound of the Hoover. It calmed her, and I had ordered a sound machine on Amazon, but it hadn't arrived yet, so I put some white noise on my phone, and it was the first night that I'd ever done that. Avery woke up at around 1 in the morning, and this wasn't unusual for her to not sleep for very long. She did tend to wake quite frequently in the night time. She tended to want to feed more in the night time, so I took her out of her crib. I laid down with her side lying in my bed, and I nursed her, and I fell asleep. Co-sleeping never really sat right with me. I didn't ever really feel confident about it, so it was never my intention to fall to sleep with Avery. It was my intention to feed her and then put her back to sleep, but I was just so tired and I just fell asleep. I woke up at around 4 o'clock in the morning. I was obviously disappointed in myself that I'd fallen to sleep, because I didn't want to. I'd even put a nursing chair in the corner of the room to force me to get out of bed to feed Avery so that I didn't fall to sleep in bed with her, but I know there's so many people do it and it's usually fine. I immediately checked Avery just to make sure her face was clear and she was warm, and she was. There was nothing over her face. She was exactly how I left her, with her blankets wrapped around her. She was nice and warm, so I put her back in her crib and went to go back to bed. Something, I don't know what, but something made me check her again just before I got back into bed. I turned back around to check Avery before going back to bed. I placed my hand on her chest to see if I could feel her chest rising and her breathing, and I couldn't. I put my fingers under her nose to see if I could feel her breathing, and I couldn't. At that point I turned off the white noise just in case I couldn't hear anything because of that, and I tried to feel / hear for her breathing again, and I couldn't feel it, I couldn't hear it. So I got her out of her cot and put her on my bed, and it was at that point that I really started to panic because I wasn't gentle about it. I quickly whipped her out of the cot and put her on the bed, and that motion didn't wake her at all. I removed the blanket that was wrapped around her and I unzipped her swaddle, and she still didn't wake up. She was floppy. Everything felt like time was moving really slow, but I know that everything happened in a matter of seconds. And I remember thinking to myself that I needed to wake Josh up, but I didn't want to, because then I was admitting that it was really happening and I'd have to face it. But obviously I did. I said to Josh, she's not breathing, and that woke him up immediately and he got up straight away. One of us called 999, I can't remember which one of us it was, and we explained what was happening to the operator, and she told us to get her completely undressed, put her on the cold hard floor and start CPR. I didn't know what I was doing. I was panicking and crying and screaming down the phone. Luckily Josh had recently taken a first aid course with work, so he knew roughly what he was doing so that he could start the compressions, and he did. Avery's colour was still pink before we put her down on the floor. She was still pink, she was still warm, and I don't know how long Josh was doing the compressions for, but I noticed that her body started to turn grey. Felt like time was moving so slowly, and it felt like half an hour when really it was only a few minutes. The operator asked one of us to go outside and stand outside the door so that the ambulance knew exactly where they were going when they got here. So Josh did that, and then it was my turn to take over the compressions. I didn't know what I was doing, but I'd watched Josh to know roughly what he was doing. But it was scary because I thought I was gonna break her ribs, but every time I did a set of compressions I just panicked more and more because it wasn't working. She was getting greyer. I heard Josh downstairs screaming and shouting. I'm guessing he was on the phone to someone, and Avery was lying on the floor lifeless. It felt like hours had passed before the first responder got there. Obviously it wasn't. He attached SATS probes to her chest, and they were then attached to a machine, and then he took over the compressions. He asked me a lot of questions. I can't remember what they were now. The machine kept saying no shock needed. I remember that, and every time it said it I kept asking if there was a heartbeat, and that was why it was saying that, and he kept saying no. I later found out that that actually meant there was absolutely no baseline whatsoever. My heart broke more and more every time he said there was no heartbeat, because I knew the more time went on, the less of a chance that she would be brought back. At that point, I really thought that she'd gone and we'd lost her. At some point Josh must have called my mum, because I noticed that she was standing behind me. The first responder told me that they would be taking Avery out to the ambulance soon, and that I should get her a red book, which, if you're not from the UK, it is a little book that is given to babies up to the age of 5, and it keeps a track of everything that goes on, their weights and vaccinations and so on. I asked the first responder again if that meant that they had found a heartbeat and that's why they were taking her to the ambulance, and he said no. So I rushed downstairs and I passed my dad on the way down, and I remember he asked if I needed help with anything, but I don't even think I answered. I was just frantically trying to find Avery's book. and my shoes. As I was doing that, another paramedic came in and went upstairs, and then they brought Avery downstairs and took her out the front door. I rushed after them because I was so scared that they were going to leave and I wouldn't be able to go with her. We were smack bang in the middle of COVID at this time. I didn't know what the rules were. Luckily, I was allowed in the ambulance. They sat me in the front seat while they worked on Avery in the back. During that time, my mum and my dad and Josh all just hugged me and tried to tell me that she was going to be okay. But at that point, I really didn't believe it. I noticed through the little small window that led to the back of the ambulance that they had written down 4:37 on the whiteboard, and that was exactly 2 minutes before Avery's birth time. So it was exactly 2 minutes before she turned 3 days old. And then shortly after, I heard someone say that they'd found a heartbeat. Things moved quite quickly after that. They got everyone strapped in and ready to move, and Josh followed the ambulance. My mum and dad stayed at home because the boys were still in bed. The entire journey, I don't think I've ever prayed so hard in my life. I was just begging that Avery would be okay, that she would come through this. And the driver kept trying to make small talk. I think he was just trying to be nice, he was just trying to distract me. When we arrived at the hospital, I hurried out of the door to get to Avery as they brought her out, and I followed her into the urgent care unit, and they had a bay ready for her, and as soon as she was rolled in, a crowd of doctors and nurses were just surrounding her, putting needles in, putting probes on her, and I noticed someone familiar in there. The midwife, or one of the midwives that was in the room when Avery was born, was there, and when she saw me, she gave me a hug, and I don't know why, but something about that, about the familiarity and knowing that she was there when Avery was born, just made me break down. I stood in the corner of the bay and just watched them work on her. They kept asking me a lot of questions about my pregnancy and about my birth, and I even noticed that my maternity notes were in the room. Of course, Avery's pregnancy and birth was totally textbook and healthy, so my answers really didn't help them. Josh arrived not long after me, and they put 2 chairs out for us so that we could sit in the corner and watch them work. I don't know if it was my eyes playing tricks on me or if one of the doctors had nudged her, but I thought I saw her arm move, and then not long after that we heard her cry. And that was the first proof that we really had that she was alive. We were allowed to go up to Avery after that. She was lying in the little crib, covered in wires and probes and machines. There was a little oxygen mask placed next to her head, and she was breathing. Her little chest was going up and down. She was breathing, and she was breathing on her own. I asked if she could hear us. The doctor said that she could and encouraged us to talk to her, so we did. And we told her that she was going to be okay. Josh must have promised her the world in a matter of a few seconds if she just got there. I promised her that I would do whatever it takes to make her well again. We were told by the doctors that Avery was going to be transferred to the Royal Bristol Hospital for Children, to their paediatric intensive care unit. I remember thinking it was quite strange that Avery was so small and she wasn't going to go to NICU. But because she'd already been discharged from hospital, it meant that she needed to go to the paediatric intensive care. They said that they would need to sedate her for the journey. So we were shown into a small parents' room not far from Avery's bay, and the nurses kept offering us food and drink. And then we were left alone for a while. We didn't really speak to each other, me and Josh. I don't think we really knew what to say. I remember telling Josh that I shouldn't have fallen to sleep with her, and he told me that he didn't want me thinking it was my fault. The nurses bought me in a breast pump because my milk had started to come in that morning, and I was terrified that if I didn't pump then my milk would go away and then I wouldn't have anything to feed Avery with. Once Avery was intubated, we were allowed to go back in to see her. Obviously at this point she'd been sedated and there was a tube going into her mouth and that was breathing for her. The doctors told us that from the blood tests that they were doing, her ammonia levels were high, which meant that there could have been an issue with her metabolism, but they said that once she got to Bristol they would investigate more and see if they could find out why she stopped breathing in the first place. The rest of the day was spent waiting for the transport team to arrive, because I don't think they arrived until about 6 in the evening. We both called our families and let them know what was going on, and I asked my mum to pack us a suitcase, which Josh then went and collected, that we could take to Bristol with us. Of course my mum, no questions asked, took the boys for me. She knew I needed to be with Avery. While we had time to wait, it really made me stop and think and start panicking about all the things that hadn't even crossed my mind. Like, what are the boys gonna think? What if they overheard everything? Because I know I was screaming, I know I was crying. What if they woke up and heard it? And most of all, because I've had experience with brain injuries in the past, I knew that being without oxygen for so long would have damaged Avery's brain. I was terrified of what was going to happen to her. The transport team arrived at, like I said, around 6 o'clock, and she was going to be airlifted to the hospital. I wasn't allowed to go in the helicopter with her because there wasn't enough space. They put her in this pod. It was like a really big, it almost looked like a space shuttle of some kind, and they put her inside it, and she looked so tiny in it, covered in wires and machines. They closed the lid and we were allowed to follow them out and see her into the helicopter. So we said goodbye, and then we went and waited on the inside of the door so that we could watch her take off. And the doors were locked for the helicopter to take off, so there was a crowd of people, and we heard somebody say, "That's a parent's worst nightmare." Me and Josh just hugged each other and watched her. Once the helicopter had gone, the doors were unlocked, so me and Josh rushed to the car and raced after her to Bristol. The car journey was mostly silent. Josh asked me what I was worried about, not in a sarcastic way. He was asking me what things I was actually worried about, and there was so much at that point. But Avery was alive. That was the main thing. That was the best gift that could have been given to us at that time. She suffered a 40-minute cardiac arrest. I don't know anyone that's come through that and survived, and the fact that I woke up exactly when I did proves to me that Avery was 100% meant to live. She is meant to be on this earth for a reason, and that's why God didn't take her from us. Falling to sleep with Avery in the bed could have been the reason she stopped breathing. That is guilt that I will have to live with for the rest of my life, knowing that I could have potentially caused this from a stupid mistake. But it could also be the reason that she's alive. She was pink when I woke up. She was warm, so my body heat could have kept her blood flowing long enough for me to wake up and for us to start the CPR so that she would come back. Unfortunately, these are things that we're never going to know, so I'm never going to get closure on that. I'm never going to not feel guilty. I'm never going to not feel as though I'm somehow responsible for this, and somehow responsible for why this little girl doesn't have the life that she deserved. I will do everything in my power and whatever it takes to make sure she has a happy life. I'm going to leave this part of the story there. I will continue with Avery's intensive care journey and hospital journey in another video, but that is the context really on how Avery got her brain injury. It's a sad story, it's a traumatic story, I definitely think I've suffered some PTSD from it, and there's definitely a lot of feelings that I just haven't had the strength to address yet. But every time I get a flashback, every time I think about it, all I need to do is look at my baby girl because she's here, because she fought and she survived something that most people wouldn't survive. Make sure you're subscribed so that you can hear the next part of the story, and I will see you in a few days with another video. Bye guys.